Hi, I'm Alex Greenbaum, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about the cello and some of the works written for it. So the cello is part of the string instrument family, along with the violins, violas, and double basses. And it was invented in the 16th century roundabouts, just like those other instruments I mentioned. It has 4 strings, and they are tuned in fifths. This piece of equipment here is my bow. It's made of wood with horsehair here. My strings are made of metal, though originally they weren't. They were originally made out of animal parts, cat gut, sheep gut, cow gut, and actually that is still used for strings today. But most of my strings are made of metal. And the cello was most popular at the start of its life in Italy, specifically near Bologna. That's where there was a first sort of group of really great cellists, both teachers and composers and performers. So I thought I would share for you an example of some of the earliest music we have written for the cello alone. The cello wasn't really considered an instrument that should be playing on its own. It was mostly used to support the other instruments, like the violin. It was there to provide the bass line, maybe some rhythm, but it was around this time, around the late 1600s in Bologna, 1690 or so, that there was a movement to start writing more music for the cello itself. One of the biggest names from that time and place was Domenico Gabrielli, and he wrote a set of 7 pieces called ricercari, which were sort of free-form miniatures, or some of them not so miniature, for the cello. So here is an example of one of those. It's one of the shorter ones. It's his ricercar number 5. About 30 years after that piece, a good ways across Europe, was Johann Sebastian Bach. At this point in his career, he was writing mostly instrumental music, as it was one of the few times in his career that he wasn't employed as part of a church and having to write sacred music all the time. So this is when he explored more instrumental works, the solo works for his violin, as well as cello. So this is perhaps the most well-known of his movements, of his suites. So this is the prelude from Bach's first suite for solo cello. As time went on, composers started to experiment with different kinds of sounds and techniques that the cello could make. So far, you've heard me use the bow to play the strings in what we call arco. But there are a few more ways we can get sounds out of the instrument. We can use our fingers to pluck it, or in Italian they call it pizzicato. And when we're plucking it, there's various ways we can pluck it, so that's the sort of standard way, sounds nice. Later on, in the 20th century, there was a technique which was developed called snap pits, or sometimes it's called Bartók pits for the composer, Bela Bartók, who used it a fair amount in his work. And that involves same sort of idea of pizzicato, but then we do it with such force that we let it snap against the fingerboard, so it sounds a little bit like this. You can hear the snap. And then there's similar percussive kind of sounds that we can do with the bow as well. So we can use the wood of the bow. We call that col legno, or with the wood. And then some other things we can do with the bow. If we play very near the bridge of the cello, we get sort of a scratchier, more metallic sound maybe. That's called ponticello. So there's degrees of that. I can sort of play only a little bit near the bridge. And then as I get closer, you can hear it sort of gets higher and higher on the frequencies and the sort of quality of the sound. The opposite of that is when we have the bow very near the fingerboard, and that gives it sort of a hushed, quiet quality. That's called sul tasto. Some composers also ask us to make other percussive sounds. We hit the body of the cello sometimes. Sometimes we're asked to bow in other places beyond our normal place, but maybe behind the bridge. And all these sort of create sounds that are not normally or hadn't been before thought of as cello sounds, but really give us a pretty rich palette and box of tools that we can use. So I thought I'd share one more piece for you by a composer named Tania León that explores some of these extended techniques, we call them. So please enjoy. This is the third movement from Tania León's 4 pieces. Thank you for joining us. I hope you learned something about the cello that maybe you didn't know before or just got a new appreciation for, and hopefully you'll explore a little bit more of what the cello and these other instruments have to offer. Thanks again.